right. I think it's time for us to begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, wherever you're coming from. Our effort to celebrate African American History Month, we want to remember and to commemorate individuals and issues that made the civil rights movement so important and successful in bringing the issue of racism and segregation as its byproduct as an important issue on the table to be dealt with during 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond in the United States and even around the world. The struggle for justice and equality that have begun with that movement in the United States did not end. And young people of today are continuing on their own way to strive for a better and more just world. So it is important for all of them to learn from previous experiences and from true and comprehensive history of that movement and the ongoing issues that stem from it. This is where our institutions of higher learning supposed to step in to provide that comprehensive knowledge and the whole picture to teach the future leaders about the important past collective experiences. We at Broward College in South Florida certainly are doing that every day, and this event is just one of the examples of our efforts. The point of this event is to unpack the hegemonic memory about the civil rights movement, because that memory is missing some of the key components. We want to do that because young people need to know the whole picture in order to understand the workings of the social movements and how they affect political systems and governing in our democracy, and how power distribution in any system affects that memory. As noted by Faseh in his article on community education, hegemony substitutes one kind of knowledge for another in the context of power relations. Power in that sense is almost defined by what is excluded, not what is included. And so, let us bring back knowledge and experiences that are forgotten or made invisible, as that is to be the main point of the community education. All that to enhance learning of our Broward College and other students who are joining us today. I'm happy to tell you from all over Florida, from all over the United States, and even from around the world. We have people joining us from the countries in Europe, and two, at least, professors from Turkey. There was one professor from Bogota, Colombia. And so Broward College is being on the forefront of putting all of us together and so that we can learn from these collective experiences, which is the point of community education. Broward College welcomes you all, and we hope that you will soon come to visit our college in person as well. Let me now introduce our guests who are going to share with us some of those important, maybe not so well known parts of the history about the civil rights movement and some of the goals and issues which are still relevant today. Dr. Alhaji Amri Yassin Al-Hadid. Dr. Al-Hadid is the founder and the first chairperson of Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University. Dr. Al-Hadid is also a founder and CEO of a Great Debate Honor Society, Inc., and a Great Debate Academy, Inc. Dr. Al-Hadid earned his PhD in sociology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Bachelor in Psychology and Sociology from Alabama State University. He is a co-author of super cool and important book, which is called Between the Cross and the Crescent, Christian and Muslim Perspectives on Malcolm and Martin. And I will share with you a link in the chat for that book. You can all check it, and I recommend get it, with Dr. Louis Baldwin. Dr. Al-Hadid served as a president and a member of the editorial board of the Association of Social and Behavioral Sciences, Inc. He is a member of National Council for Black Studies Incorporated and Association for Studies of Classical African Civilization Incorporated. Dr. Alhadi is the principal organizer of annual Africana Muslim Conference during African American History Month in Nashville, Tennessee. He will provide us today with a big picture behind the civil rights movement and African American Muslim involvement and contributions to it. We very much appreciate to have scholars such as him joining us for this event, joining Broward College and enhancing our learning. I just can't appreciate enough his time for today. After Dr. Alhadi, we're going to hear from Mr. Khairi Al-Amin, who is an attorney, business development, and serial entrepreneur with a background in social justice, e-commerce, entertainment, restaurant, and hospitality industries. Mr. Al-Amin is also the son of wrongfully imprisoned civil rights activist and American Muslim pioneer, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown, and in all his work, the fight for his father's freedom is ever present. Mr. Al-Amin currently owns a music company and content creation studio specializing in short content and photography for artists and businesses looking to make a splash on social media. He also owns a law firm with his mother and serves on political, social justice, and education boards, both locally and nationally. He will speak about his father, H. Rap Brown, now Imam Jamil. His contributions to civil rights movement are huge and widely documented, but his current struggle that is still continuing is not well known, and this is why we wanted to remind us and public about him. And that is what Khairi will do for us today, so that we do not forget our heroes of civil rights movement struggle. If you want to see more of his work, you can visit, let's say, his Facebook. I'll share his Facebook, but later on I will share also a website that talks about efforts that he's doing to remind us about his father's story.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. So I'd like to first of all ask the audience if you would participate with me in remembering the more than 500,000 people in this country that have died from the COVID, and also remember the victims of systemic and institutionalized racism that has existed in this country since 1619. So we'll take about about 20 seconds to remember those victims, please.
Now.
Shukran. When we speak about African American History Month, we want to give credit where credit is due. This month was started by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1926. It was his intention to change the narrative or create a narrative where we could talk more carefully about the culture and history of African Americans who were then and are now being miseducated about that culture and history, and also to push back on the mythology of white supremacy and racism. And now he, along with people like W.E.B. Du Bois, assumed that through knowledge, you could eradicate the inferiority complex among African Americans. And with that same body of knowledge, you could somewhat convince white supremacists to modify their attitudes and their behavior toward African Americans. But as both men traveled on this path, they eventually realized that racism is fundamentally the culture of most white people. So to eliminate this ideology is also to eliminate the culture. So then they started becoming involved more in movements. Originally, the holiday was called Negro History Week, and it occurred during the birth dates of President Abraham Lincoln and the Honorable Frederick Douglass. In the 1960s and 1970s, students who were involved in the civil rights movement, especially Black Power wing of that movement, people such as Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, Jamil Al-Amin, at the time he was known as H. Reb Brown. And on the college campuses of America, you had students who were agitating for Black studies or Africana studies across the country, starting with at San Francisco State in 1968. So eventually those campaigns inside of various professional organizations that were concerned about the history and culture of African America prevailed. And that's why today, the month as African American History Month, we went from Negro History Week to African American History Month. So the next thing I want to share with you, the beloved people, is that I hope all of you had an opportunity to watch the wonderful documentary that Louis Skip Gates did on the Black church, subtitled "This Is Our Song, This Is Our Story." And I want you, if you can, it's still available on PBS. You can Google it and get it online. But there, in the beginning of part 1, there's a fascinating narrative about African American Muslims. What he reported in the documentary is that 1/4, about 25%, of the Africans who were brought over here as prisoners of war and enslaved on the plantations of America were Muslims from Central and West Africa. And that's one very significant statistic. Most of those prisoners of war who were Muslims were on the plantations in places like Sapelo Island and St. Simon. These are in South Carolina. These are islands. Now, in some cases, they were maroons, which meant they actually ran off the plantations and retreated to the islands. Same phenomenon you have in places like Jamaica and Brazil and Haiti. You had people who came over, but as soon as they got an opportunity, they ran off the plantations. And then you also had these people in places like Savannah, Georgia. North Carolina had a significant number. So most of the Muslims were concentrated in those areas like Savannah, Georgia, Sapelo Island, and what we call the Gullah Geechee area of South Carolina and Savannah, Georgia. Now, of course, you had people who were in other areas like in Maryland, and you had Abdul Rahman, who was in Natchez, Mississippi. Omar Said was in North Carolina. So I just wanted to just highlight a few of those heroic ancestors that we have to turn to in terms of our inspiration. Now, it's also important to remember that these individuals did not come over here, blind, deaf, and dumb with no knowledge, skills, or culture. They came over here with the skills that were needed to build the infrastructure and the buildings, inside of this country. And for example, the capital of the United States was built by slaves. Most of the mansions in the southern states were built by slaves. Universities like Brown University, Princeton University were built by these people. So they didn't just come over here and learn those trades once they got over here. They came over here with the knowledge of how to grow cotton. They were farmers. They were people who knew how to irrigate. They were skilled craftsmen. So when you see the ironwork in places like Charleston, South Carolina, or in New Orleans, these people came from Benin, where they worked with iron. And when they came over here, those skills were, applied. So they were skilled craftsmen when they came over. Now, of course, you had some who had to learn with on-the-job training. But for the most part, the slaves were captured from areas where they had the skills that they needed in order to forge the kind of development that they wanted to take place in these in the original 13 colonies. So I wanted to, highlight that. And then in the second part, it was a two-part program. One part was on the 16th of February, and the other part was on the 17th. But in the second part, sort of in the middle of it, there was a discussion about Marcus Garvey in the Pan-African movement, and then it segued to the revival of Islam in the 20th century among people like Noble Drew Ali with the Moorish Science Temple, Adam Elijah Muhammad with the Nation of Islam. So I think it's very important to understand that, and hopefully, we can get some wealthy Muslims and some scholars and actors and directors who can do a similar thing for us, because they just didn't devote enough time talking about our history and culture. Of course, the program was set up for African-American Christians in the church. So they were, kind enough to make sure that we were aware of our culture. And they also highlighted the various denominations of traditional African religions, such as Obeah in South Carolina, Cointelpro in Brazil, and Santa Teria. So when we came over, hardly any of us were Christians. Now, it was noted that those that came over here who might have been Christians came from places like the Congo, and they had been converted, by the Catholics, Roman Catholics over there. However, those who came over on that particular persuasion had a very interesting way of approaching Catholicism, because in Catholicism they have a lot of iconography, statues, and so forth. So what would happen with these canonized saints who were presented as statues, these people would, in the daytime, they would present themselves as Catholics, but at night they would use those same statues to honor some of the orishas, from their form of religion. And so that was a way of saying they were sort of like Catholics by day and voodoo by night. You could see this phenomenon in New Orleans today and places like Mobile. And then when you go further south in Brazil, Cuba, Trinidad, Puerto Rico, you still see that. And the point I'm making here is that those who came over, we would say about 25% were Muslims. And then the other 75% were practitioners, as I said earlier, of various denominations of traditional African religion. And you can see that these practices survived, and then Islam sort of faded out. But when Islam resurfaced in the 20th century, led by people such as Noble Drew Ali and Farad Muhammad in the 1930s, Noble Drew Ali in 1913, they brought Islam to us in a certain package, because they felt that the main priority was knowledge of self and kind, which we had been stripped of. So both Noble Drew Ali and Master Farad Muhammad took the position saying, well, what is primary here, in order to know God, you have to first know yourself. So then Farad in 1930s created the Lost Foundation of Islam and asserted that our ethnic or cultural identity and nationality was the Asiatic, Black man, and from the tribe of Shabazz. And then, of course, in 1913, Noble Drew Ali's position was that we were Moors from the Moorish Empire. And I think that was a very powerful an appropriation, because, as you know, the Moors went into the Iberian Peninsula in 711 and created the Moorish Empire, developed universities there, Salamanca, and they also had it grounded in the northern part of Africa in Timbuktu, the University of Sankore. So higher education and learning was going on definitely in the Mali Empire and also during the period of the Songhai Empire. So you had three Sudanic empires, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Now, in the Mali Empire, we know about the pilgrimage of Mansa Musa in around 1324. He took so much gold and precious metals to North Africa and the Middle East that it created, inflation in that area. In other words, sort of devalued the amount of gold, because that's where the gold was initially taken from the interior of the Bilal of Sudan. And then, of course, in the Songhai Empire, we know about Askia, the Great. So you had these great, and in Songhai, the rulers were known as Askias, and then in the Mali Empire, they were known as Mansa. So you have somebody like Mansa Musa, and you can almost draw a straight line from Mansa Musa, Askia the Great, back to the Sahaba, among the first Africans who came into the fold of Islam, like Bilal ibn Rabah and Zayd Waritha. They were from Habasha, or Ethiopia. So I'm saying all of this, beloved people, because we do not want to start African American history with plantation slavery in the wilderness of North America. Before we go down home, we have to go back home. And so once we go back home, then we can come and deal with, down home and up south, in the north. So I just wanted, sort of lay that out. Now, let's go quickly to the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam played a very vital role in our struggle. However, before we get to the nation, we have to also put Marcus Garvey in perspective. And I want to talk about, like the great debate in our struggle. And this struggle, we had two orientations as to how we were going to get out of the mess that we found ourselves in. In the 19th century, those individuals who were free, either because they bought themselves out of slavery or they ran away from plantation and went to places like Boston and Philadelphia and New York. So you had a cadre of freedmen. We could say as many as 400,000. I mean, as many as maybe 400,000 to 500,000 were freed in different parts of the country outside of the 13 Confederate states. Now, there were some inside of the Confederate states, but most were on the outside. And those that were on the outside joined the abolitionist movement. And so to that extent, they became somewhat of a threat to the powers that be. And so they formed an organization called the American Colonization Society to try to convince them, since they were already free, to go back to Africa. Well, some of them went along with that proposal, and that's how you got the country of Liberia. Its capital is named Monroeville, after James Monroe, the presiding president at the time. And so that was one way. You had two lines of tension here. One solution was repatriation, literally mean going back to Africa. And Marcus Garvey pushed that hard and heavy during his movement with the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Also, you had, during the American Revolution, you had some African prisoners of war who participated in the American Revolution on the side of the British. And because when the people in the 13 colonies eventually became victorious, they had to leave, because otherwise they would have been, put on trial for treason and either, executed or put in prison. So they went back to places like Nova Scotia, and many of them also went to Sierra Leone, and the capital of Sierra Leone is Freetown. And that's also significant because you're talking about freedmen going back to set up Freetown and Liberia. So in other words, Liberia and Freetown are like our Canaan, our promised land. Okay. So I just want to ground things. And then let's just come quickly then, because I know I have about 15 minutes. Let's come quickly to looking at the present situation. The point I want to make about the Nation of Islam, without going into a lot of discussions about theology and mythology and so forth, it's what was really significant about it in terms of people who were non-Muslims or outside of the Nation of Islam, even if they were Muslim, and even those who were within it. It's number one, the Nation of Islam was it was a human rights organization. It also took a strong position on reparations, because in other words, it said it wanted to separate, and then they wanted to be reparated for 25 years so that on Arable land. So there was a reparation argument inside the Nation of Islam. There was also a conscientious objector argument. People in the Nation of Islam refused to be involved in the military. And obviously, you know, that's what happened with Muhammad Ali when he beat Sonny Liston. And matter of fact, I think it was February 25th, 1964. He beat Lipson, and he announced that he was a member of the Nation of Islam. His leader was Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So because of that, you know, the boxing establishment turned on him and drafted him, and then he had a choice to make. You know, are you going to go into the military, or are you going to resist? And so he made the Nation of Islam argument that he was a conscientious objector. As a matter of fact, his case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And the argument turned on whether or not the Nation of Islam was really a religion. And so they used the message of the black man as a piece of evidence, you know, to make that case. So it was a reparation movement. It was also a movement that were conscious objectors. It was a movement where the members, you know, before the times of Imam Muhammad, who came into office in 1975, the members did not vote. So voting was not a part of their worldview. Another powerful thing about the Nation of Islam is that they had their own parochial school, because they challenged the miseducation of our people in the public schools of America, in the parochial schools of America, and the private schools of America. They had the University of Islam, which I think was one of the first Islamic schools in America. And it's been around since the 1930s. It was initially called the University of Islam, but now we have the Imam W.D. Muhammad High School, and he also had the Clara Muhammad School. But this started in the 1930s, long before, you know, there was an MSA or an ISNA, you know, inside of this country. And so they taught Arabic. And I think when we think about the Arabic classes, Honorable Elijah Muhammad had two sons, Wallace, who became Imam Warafi Muhammad. He was perhaps one of the astute scholars of the University of Islam education. And then his youngest brother, Akbar Muhammad, left the country, and he went and studied Azhar in Cairo. And for many years, his arena was in the field of higher education. He was at State University of Binghamton. I met him here in Nashville at Vanderbilt University. He was the chair, he was the director of the African American Studies Center here at Vanderbilt. And then when his father died, he left and went to State University of New York in Binghamton, where he stayed until he passed. But those two scholars, you know, Imam Muhammad scholarship, when he came into office on Savior's Day, 1975, February 26, 1975, he moved in the direction of converting probably close to 2 million African Americans to Islam. Now, I don't know of any other period in the history of Islam in the last 1,400 years where 2 million people were brought into the fold of Islam within a period of 12 months. You know, Allah was with me. He obviously was the Mujaddid, you know what I'm saying? So I wanted to, you know, put that in place. And then let's talk about another dimension of, I'm just sort of laying out the landscape. Let's talk about another dimension. Today, in the United States federal government, we have Andre Carson, who is a U.S. representative from Indiana. We have Ilhan Omar, who is U.S. representative from Minnesota, the same state where George Floyd was, you know, killed. And then you have Rashida Tlaib, who is from Detroit. She's Palestinian. Ilhan Omar is Somali. And then, of course, you have Keith Ellison, who used to be in the Congress, but he left and went back to Minnesota, who's currently now the Attorney General there. And he is the one who has the case of George Floyd. So we're going to see what Islamic justice look like, or I don't guess he's going to bring out the Sharia, but certainly we will be able to see, what Islamic justice looks like in terms of compassion, and he can really get a victory, or justice for his family, and also justice for other African Americans who have been, killed under the same kind of circumstances, So I wanted to, look at the present situation. Now let's look at, and I'm going to wrap it up with just the great debate between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Alhadi Malik al-Shabazz. Now, as I pointed out earlier, when you look at our struggle, there's been a parallel line. You've had, two lines of development. One line of development had much to do with, Pan-Africanism, nationalism, driven by principles of self-determination, self-reliance, self-defense. So that's we've had a human rights movement within our movement, our struggle. And these human rights movements sought international solutions to our problem, not just, in the 1960s when Haj Malik wanted to bring a petition to the United Nations, or when Marcus Garvey tried to do the same thing in the League of Nations in the 1920s. But there's always been this human rights movement going on inside our struggle. Initially in the 19th century, it was for repatriation. But then when most people decide, well, we're not going back to Africa, we're going to stay here because we got equity in the real estate, we got equity in this economy, and we want to get our share. So then, of course, you had the nationalist movement, and you had a call for separation, such as, with the Nation of Islam. Now, the other stream of thought initially started with assimilation, and it was championed by the National Association of Advancement of Colored People. It was established in 1909. So the dialectic here is that you had the assimilationists represented by the NAACP, and then on the other end, you had Marcus Garvey, representing the Pan-African nationalists. So when we get into the 20th century, and I want to wind it down a bit, there's much more that I can say, but let me just focus it here. Let's go to Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. The Brown case was very significant because it was the single most landmark case that overturned Plessy v. Ferguson. It overturned separate but equal that went all the way back into the 19th century. And of course, Booker T. Washington sort of compromised in that way because his attitude was that on all things that are purely social, we should be as separate as the fingers of the hand. But of all things of mutual progress, such as economics, we should be one as the fist. So in other words, in the South, he sort of accommodated the colonization, the domestic colonialism, which was euphemistically called de jure segregation in the South, right? And so that thesis was not rebutted until Martin Luther King came along in Atlanta to push back on the Atlanta Compromise that Booker T. Washington put forward. So when we get post-Brown, and that's Brown v. Board of Education is the case that the Martin Luther King era of the civil rights movement was based on. So now you get a civil rights movement that's not led by lawyers, such as NAACP Legal Defense Fund, because they were fighting in the courtrooms. Martin Luther King is using the social gospel that he learned from Howard Thurman, and he learned from his studies at Boston University, and he's putting the movement in the streets of America, starting with the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955, 1966, based on so in other words, they took Brown and took to the level of public accommodation. So they got a victory in Montgomery. They formed their own organization, their Montgomery Improvement Association. And out of that experiment with the techniques of Gandhian nonviolence, they formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King then moved from Montgomery to Atlanta. And so now you got a integrationist movement led primarily by preachers, Baptist preachers, Methodist preachers, AME preachers, but led by Christian preachers, okay? Then in the North, the vanguard of the movement was led by Muslim ministers, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcom X. So you got a movement between 1954 and 1968, pretty much led by ministers, by preachers. You got Muslim imams and you got Christian preachers leading the movement. Now, among the Muslims, again, now the Muslims are pushing human rights. The Christians are pushing civil rights and integration, okay? Now, Malcolm was in the Nation of Islam from 1952 to 1963. He inadvertently made a comment about the chicken coming home to roost in relationship to the assassination of to Kennedy, President Kennedy. He didn't mean it the way it came off, but the New York Times took it and ran with it. And because, the Nation of Islam was under a lot of scrutiny by the powers that be, the only thing that Elijah Muhammad could do was to suspend him. And so he suspended him, but Malcolm knew at that time that he was not going to be let back into the Nation of Islam. However, what was happening here, as I pointed out earlier, Imam Muhammad and Akbar was studying, Sunni Islam. Malcolm was doing the same thing. Malcolm went to Cairo in 1959 to lay out the itinerary for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to make Umrah. So he was there in Cairo. And so his introduction and his serious study of mainstream Islam started as early as 1959. Now, of course, he was not saying that in public, but in his private life with his family and other Sunni Muslims, he was, learning Quran. He was memorizing. I understand he had memorized Surah Al-Baqarah. He could pick up the Quran and read it in Arabic and understand, what he was saying. He was starting to study sooner. So when he made the Hajj in April 1964, he already had a core of knowledge, a stock of knowledge about Islam. And then, of course, in that same year, 1964, he went back for Umrah in September. And he was being supported to a great extent by the Muslim World League and also the brothers and sisters at Azhar there in Cairo. Matter of fact, he was able to secure a number of scholarships for students to study at Medina. And he also secured scholarship for brothers and sisters to study at Azhar. When he was in Egypt, he was a guest of Gamal Abdel Nasser. And as you know, Gamal Abdel Nasser was connected with Kwame Nkrumah. And they together was trying to build the United States of Africa, okay? So I will, pause at this point, and hopefully what I had to say was beneficial. And there are questions. Alhamdulillah, I'll be more than, honored to try my best to share what I know.
Absolutely, Dr. Hadid. I learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I very much appreciate that that explanation about these different dynamics in the South versus North. Those dynamics, South-North dynamics, still persist in so many ways, not only in terms of civil rights movement, but in terms of other things that happen in our country. Excellent. So let's have a few. Let's have now this conversation about the Coalition for Good Governance. We have Dr. Ahmed Nasir will be now joining us. And then after that, we will have Mr. Khairi Al-Amin from Atlanta joining us. But now let's hear from Dr. Ahmed. Please, Dr. Ahmed, you jump in and save us, since Mikhail is currently, I hope he's all right. I don't know, did he communicated with you and the things?
No, he did. Yeah.
So you please, if you can, tell us more about the coalition and how and what it's doing here locally in South Florida and what it's doing nationally and how it is connected to those goals that Dr. Alhadi just explained. And just for those of you who are joining us from around the world, and even from South Florida, if you don't know, this is Dr. Ahmed Nasir. He himself, just like Dr. Al-Hadid, they were both very humble people, they are both essentially part of that struggle. So they are both, you know, people that we look up to when it comes to this issue. So we are hearing from what you call, you know, directly from people who are involved. So Dr. Ahmed, please, you take over at this point, and hopefully Mikhail will join us maybe later.
Yes, thank you so very much. Assalamu alaikum, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. We thank you, Dr. Mirsad, and the university for hosting this very, very important conversation. And I thank my good friend, Dr. Alhadi. You know, he did a better job than I did. If I had prayed for 10 years, I wouldn't be able to touch the way he did it. Allah had blessed us. And I want to let everybody know, Masjid Al-Ansar in Miami, Florida, is the oldest masjid. It's not one of the oldest. It is the oldest. And it was the first masjid throughout the whole state of Florida and the first school, you know. So at any rate, I just wanted to kind of say that because I hear that a lot and we need to correct information. Now, with regards to the American Coalition for Good Government, it began with a lecture that Imam W.D. Mohammed gave in December 1977, I think. And he was addressing the evolution of our community. As Dr. Alhadi pointed out, in the Nation of Islam, we did not vote. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at that time, he said that he did not see a legitimate political candidate that we could support at that time. You know, he was pointing out the fact that we couldn't finance our own politicians. So therefore, many of the politicians were on the tape. They were bought and paid for. So he didn't want to put the community of the African-American community at risk with his reputation going behind a particular candidate, and then that candidate sell us out. So anyway, the concept of political responsibility was evolved with Imam W.D. Muhammad. And you'll know in our religion, it says, alaykum, I can't think of the phrase, it's skipping my mind right now. And on you, each of you, مسؤول كلكم مسؤول كلكم راء. It'll come to me. Each of you are responsible for dependents up under you. So in the scheme of the religion, Imam Muhammad brought us to the fact that the Islamic religion is total life, is education, is business, is government, where in his father's teaching, we were referred to as a baby nation. So we didn't have the adult rational concept of complete Islamic life because we knew nothing about the religion of Islam, you know, as it was first presented to us. And the one who brought it to Elijah Muhammad told Elijah Muhammad, don't worry about teaching them the religion. Your children will teach them the religion. And that is exactly what has happened. So anyway, the Coalition for Good Government, our mission is to develop a political climate for the growth in American policies by enhancing and empowering the leadership to change the circumstances that prevent us from realizing the good life. In the education, the vision is to educate and empower American citizens to improve government. And government is the destiny of man. It's man's destiny. And we are very conscientious of the fact that we have to clean up government. You know, God, Allah, has intended that man have government. But our problem is man has this margin of freedom, and he has a tendency to take advantage of the weak, the uninformed, and the sick. So this is a very, very strong effort to correct what we have in the political system in the United States. Now, I need to say this also. I'm supporting the statements of Dr. Alhadi. We saw the civil rights movement as legitimate from our African-American brothers outside of the Islamic community. Very, very legitimate. But as he said, we saw our movement as a human rights movement To us, civil rights is within human rights. You know, it's like you have a whole pie, and a slice of the pie is not the same as the whole entire pie. So we felt that the human rights approach was the total approach, because with civil rights, other governments cannot come from outside to support your concerns within the United States because of the fact that you framed it as civil rights. However, the wisdom of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad called it human rights. Thus, it made it where we could solicit help from within and without the boundaries of the United States. That's the wisdom in it. Far ahead of most of the people at that time. They didn't realize this. So we felt that we were the right and the left leg. You know, the civil rights movement was one leg and the Nation of Islam was another leg. And the two legs were working together to advance the cause of our people. But now there were elements that tried to pit this against us. So this is why we have the Coalition for Good Government, so that people can see now what it was we were trying to do in the early years. And so what we had was this particular situation where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the loudest and the only voice for many, many years, speaking on behalf of the Black person's sufferings. And I kid you not, I'm very serious. Later on, much later on, here you get SNCC, here you get the Black Panthers, and then you got Martin Luther King. They came much, much later. Now, those persons were very genuine. I know, because I had many friends in all of those organizations, and they were trying to solicit me to join their organization. They were fine. But I liked what I saw in the Nation of Islam at the time, because they not only had to talk, they had to walk. You know, they talk, you know, excuse my language, Black Power language, which this is not what we use, but I just for history's sake. But with the Nation of Islam, we had to have our own banks. We had to have our own restaurants, our own schools. We had to have our own farms. This we had. So we saw a much bigger relationship wherein we needed, now after that base was established, now we could support our own political choices, you know? And that it was the reason for Imam W.D. Muhammad establishing the Coalition for Good Government. Is government or good governance, governments. And so it is the one of the many needs in society. You know, basically there are four: education, business, religion, and government. And we see that as the responsibility of Muslims, and Muslims are in this country in America, and America is hurting. It's like a car with four tires and one tire is flat. And that flat tire has to be replaced by Muslims that are inactive. And once we become active, we could see this human machinery going forward. And the Coalition for Good Government says that diversity is that which will give the forward progress for humanity. You know, we can't all have the same one approach. We're not all the same one race. We don't all think the same, but we have been created from different circumstances intentionally. And for Muslims, it says, and God has made you into tribes and nations, not that you will despite or despise one another, but that you will get to know one another. So the Coalition for Good Government recognizes the good, beautiful efforts made by Christians, the good, beautiful efforts made by the Jews, etc. And so we have a responsibility also to bring our knowledge to the table. And I like to use this analogy. You know, your car has diversity. It's got four tires in four different places. One on the right front, left front, rear right, rear front. I see you, Dr. K. He tells me, Dr. Nazar, you're always going off point. But this is important for me, Dr. K. Please forgive me. And I'm equating the four tires on a car with basically the four races of man: black, brown, red, and yellow races. Okay, and the car cannot go anywhere. The forward progress of any automobile depends on the diversity of the four tires. So without the Muslims being in all these avenues of life, the human progress will be thwarted. It will be slow, and it would be at serious risk. So for that reason, the Coalition for Good Government was established upon, this parable and analogy that I'm giving, so that it can be seen. Now, those persons that were disingenuous, they gave most of the power and support to Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, and the Christian ministers, as Dr. Alhadi said. You had the big media behind them, and you saw very little recognition given to the Muslims. But most of the contributions to thought came from the Muslim community. It was the Muslims out in the public arena with their lives on the line for 30 years before these more popular ones that most of your listeners hear about now, that they're more familiar with. Most of them know little or nothing about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Little or nothing about Frederick Douglass and the other great leaders that Dr. Alhadi addressed, And this is the big problem in this country, So now I'm going to end what I have to say, and I'm going to deviate, Dr. K. And I say it with a smile, because I want to say it to your students. What we have to understand is that this problem nowadays of racism, it is really not the problem. It is really not what you should be focusing on, because the issue is not whether you're black or white. The issue is you're kept out of power and authority and wealth. And black and white is used to keep you and I divided. You and I are fighting each other while a handful of people rake in all of our wealth. And so you will never come to the position that you need to come to, where the Coalition of Good Government is trying to bring you up, not just Muslims, but all citizens of America. You can't get there if we're dealing with skin identification. If I'm seeing myself as a black man, I will never make progress until I see myself as a mind. The one who's working against me will be successful as long as I identify with my skin color only. But when I realize that I am a thinking mind, he no longer can control me. Same with the women. The women, you got the same problem. It's the same identical problem. You can't be pushing your lips and your whatever. You have to push your mind. And this is where the freedom movement has to evolve to. And this is why we say we work on human rights. It's the human that we have to deal with. And I hope I'm not offending anybody. Maybe you're not used to this kind of language, and I've heard people tell me, that I have offended them. But I'm going to put it to them this way, Dr. K. If you fall down in the street, you who are uncomfortable with what I'm saying, and you have a heart attack, and you black, and a black man comes up to you and starts doing CPR on you, and he puts his hand around your neck, instead of him reviving you, he's killing you. But he's black, just like you. Likewise for a white person. You fall down on the street and there's no white man come up there and he starts to perform CPR around your neck, he's going to kill you. Why? Because it's not his white skin that can save you. It's not his black skin. It's going to be the transparent knowledge. The power that you need now is knowledge that's transparent and not the color of your skin. We have to respect the color of the skin in terms of your first development. I'm black, that's my first development, okay? But listen now, you call that human being.
Yeah, I had to. He's making the distinction between civil rights and human rights. Never heard of it.
Yes, and they both work together.
It's your mind.
Two legs on the same one body. Mm-hmm. They're two legs working for the same purpose.
Okay.
But now, what I'm saying to you, I'm going to finish my comments because I'll let you give you a chance to ask me questions. But the point I'm trying to get to is we have to realize that we are being manipulated by our color, okay? When you say the word human, I'm finishing, just listen, please give me a chance. Listen first before you criticize me. When you take the word human, it's not one word, it's two words. The first word is HU, was abbreviation for HUE, which means color. It means that the human being has different colored bodies. And it's also called humus. And humus, you look this up if you don't believe me, humus means organic, fertile land. So when you talk about a human being is a two-stage creature. The hue is the first stage, means his body, that his physical body is like a womb. And then the last part of the name is M-A-N, which means mind. So when you say a human being, you mean that this is a physical body that has a particular color and it acts like a womb to get pregnant with ideas to give birth to the matured mind. So this is where the conversation is missing. This is where the Coalition for Good Government is bringing its contribution. You see, we need a more effective tool in order to fight this particular situation.
Certainly, Dr. Nasir, this is what we are doing now. Today also, we are essentially trying to, how you say, bring a whole picture behind it.
Yes, sir.
Very good. So I will remind everybody, including Karima, to keep the microphones off while the speakers are talking. And now let's hear from our Mr. Khairi Al-Amin. He's joining us from Atlanta. And he himself is an awesome person in every way, but he will also enlighten us about this whole struggle for justice and struggle for wholeness, meaning comprehensive understanding and knowledge. And he will talk about his father's contribution, Adra Brown, now Imam Jamil, and tell us about his legacy and tell us about his current struggle. So, Khairi, please, you take over at this point.
No, absolutely. First, I want to give salams. Assalamu alaikum to everybody who's on.
It will be good if you turn on the camera, please.
I tried it, saying that the host won't allow me to.
No, it was. We were able to see you. Yeah.
When I push the button, it's saying, hold on. There we go.
Yeah, we see you. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
You look awesome. You look awesome. So it's better if we see you,
Nah, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. No, shukran. But yeah, no, I want to first say, shukran, alhamdulillah, for this opportunity to once again spread the word about my father. I actually spoke with him literally 3 minutes ago. So I was able to tell him that I was getting ready to do this, and he wanted me to make sure that I extended his salams as well, and to let people know that, he's still strong, and he's still holding on, he's still fighting, and he appreciates that we're still fighting as well. I apologize to you for just getting here, but I'm actually literally at work right now. Part of my job is shooting music videos, and I have one that I'm shooting, but I was able to jump away. So shukran again. And just to give you a quick rundown on my Abi, for those who don't know, his name is Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly A-Trap Brown. And he actually started his human rights fight in the 60s during the civil rights movement. He came up fighting in Alabama, really the front lines, the trenches of the civil rights movement, where the Klan had bases and things like that. So, as he continued to mature, he linked up with organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and then even later on in life, the Black Panther Party. But he was more of a solo mover than anything. And what I tell people is his activism in the 60s had passion, but lacked maybe some direction. And when he was able to find Islam in prison in the 70s, he then was able to put his activism and that energy and zeal that he has behind the ideology that is Islam that we know and love and live. And so that's when he was able to transition from just a civil rights activist into a human rights activist. And so anyone who needed him that was being wrong, one of his favorite hadiths is, if you see a wrong, change it with your hands. And if you can't change it with your hands, change it with your words. And if you can't change it with your words, hate it in your heart. And that is the weakest form of faith. And he tried to always be the one who went down those steps. He would first try to change it with his hands if he was unable. He would definitely speak out about it. Very rarely was there a cause that he just hated in his heart and you didn't hear his voice on. And that's actually a good point for us to transition into why it's so important that our voices be heard now that he needs us in return. My father is a state prisoner in Georgia, should be a state prisoner in Georgia, but he's been being held in some of the worst prisons in the country as a federal prisoner just because of this vendetta that the federal government has had against him because of his human and civil rights activism throughout the years. When we say that Imam Jamil is innocent of the crimes that he's being accused of and that he's serving this time for, it's not us saying that without offering up an explanation as to who may have done it. We know who done it. We know who did it. We've known who's done it for this entire time. And he's actually confessed to the crime many, many times, including once on videotape. And so my first step in any time I speak with anybody is to impress upon everyone that we're not fighting this fight because we love our Imam or because he's our brother. We're also fighting this fight because he's an innocent man and he deserves his freedom. And so once we have that understanding, we can then move toward trying to get him out, because if we're not on the same page about his innocence, it's hard to convince you to help him be free. So the Imam is an innocent man, but bigger than that, he's an elderly man at this point. He's lost his eyesight. He's not getting medical treatment. In fact, he's being actively denied medical treatment in Arizona. And so our fight is to currently get him moved back to Georgia. Georgia is reviewing his case. It's currently under review. And so his need in Georgia is more than just medical. He also needs to be allowed to be in Georgia so that his voice can be a part of his legal defense. And currently it's not being able to do that. So our plea to the people is to make noise about this in a way that forces Georgia to do the right thing. He's an old man who has cancer and is blind because of lack of treatment. And so it's on Georgia to do the right thing. And so we have a letter writing campaign as well as a phone call campaign to these new elected officials in Georgia. Since we've since turned Georgia blue, we want to see if that really means anything. But yeah, so I hope that was a succinct rundown.
Yeah, very good. So tell us what's next about Imam Jamil. And so for those of you who joining us and maybe not familiar with the scene or United States or especially African-American scene, this is a huge moment. I am so happy to be part of it because we have the biggest two African-American movements in the United States, one third one missing, but Sister Karima is here. The biggest two African-American movements in the United States, basically in the same room. And so it's awesome. I'm so happy that we at Broward College were able to provide this. So Brother Kyrie, tell us what's going on, what's next? I heard that there is a hearing coming on the May 6th, right? And what are you hoping that it may happen? I saw the video. Is it May 6th or?
Oh no, there was that was from last year. And so we had a hearing. We actually did not win that hearing. But what's currently happening now is that our case is under review with what's called the Conviction Integrity Unit. And this unit was created by the district attorney's office who convicted my father, which is a blessing, because the whole purpose of that unit is to do just what it says, is check the integrity of past convictions. And so, we have a lot of issues with our case, not just the confession. And so they're reviewing all of those things to see, one, if they're going to give us a new trial, two, if they're going to agree with us that he's innocent and just release him, or three, if they'll at least admit that it's inconclusive and, release him on time served, because again, he's an elderly man with all kinds of chronic issues. And so at some point mercy comes into play. But I personally would prefer them to do the right thing and exonerate Imam Jamil and arrest the man who, well, he's already in jail, but put the crime on the man who's saying I did it and who we know matches the description, who was shot that evening when he committed the crime, all these things. So, that's what we hope for and that we pray for is coming sooner rather than later. But again, our campaign for the people is asking you to, we actually have if you go to freeimamjamil.com, it's a 3-step process. You can click the first link, copy and paste that email and send it to the people who make this decision. All we want them to know is that there are people out here who still care about Imam Jamil. And if we can get enough people to do it, then I feel like that'll move them. Public pressure is what usually makes these things happen.
Yeah, somebody provided a link. One person asked you, can you tell us why is he, some people don't know, why is he in jail? Why is he in prison?
He's in prison. He was accused of the murder of a police officer and the wounding of another police officer.
In 2000, right?
Yes, in March of 2000.
Okay, and how old is he now?
The Imam is 78, I believe. He doesn't celebrate his birthday, and so that's not, I don't not know it but he just hates his birthday, so we don't celebrate it. But he's 78, I believe.
Muslims don't celebrate their birthdays. All right, so now I would open the floor for questions. Now please, Brother Kyrie, stay with us for a few minutes. I have people from all over the world in our meeting today. I would like to greet some of them. Dr. Zwingel is my professor. She joined us. I have also people from Serbia in Europe, from Turkey, from England, some people from South America, from Ecuador, from Colombia, from all over the world. But now I would like to introduce Professor Bilal Ulusoy. He's the director of African Research Center, Gaziantep, Turkey. He's a member of the board over there, and he wants to join us and say a few words and perhaps ask questions. Dr. Ulusoy, please join us.
Hello, everyone. It was really nice to be in this conversation. I have enjoyed to listen to every word you said, and it's very interesting to see actually what's going on in the US and what kind of issues people in the US are dealing with, especially from the Muslim perspective and from African American perspective. Here, we don't really understand much, why people are angry, and is there a discrimination? If there is a discrimination, why it is like that? But now I do actually understand better. Being in the United States for such a long time, I think I left like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Now I am in Turkey. But again, the things are changing really fast. And I still see there's a vivid discussion in the United States. And I think this is the American spirit. You are in a, always discussing and always talking, always trying to do something. And this is, I think, the mainspring of progress. And that's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mirsad, for introducing me. It's nice to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Ulusoy. Now, anybody else has a question? Please go ahead. Maha, you typed in the question. Can you ask it? Because I have a question for Dr. Hadid, but before that, Maha, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted Kyrie, Assalamu alaikum, to highlight the role of Cointelpro in the incarceration and treatment of your father, and can you explain the dynamics?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, for those who don't know, Cointelpro is a counterintelligence program, and it was enacted by President Hoover. It was enacted to really interfere and interrupt the movements that the African American community were starting back in that time to get the equality that we deserved. And in that organization, when they had their launching, their meeting, they released a document. And this document listed 5 or 6 prominent people who they needed to stop. And actually, the movie that just came out, Judas and the Black Messiah, is a reference to the words that the document used to describe what they were most afraid of. And that was the rise of a Black Messiah or a Black leader. And my father's name was a part of that list of individuals. It's funny because Fred Hampton, his name wasn't on that list. He was obviously still considered one of those people, but my father's name was on that list. I believe that's part of the reason why they elected to put him at the beginning of that movie. And so the vendetta against him isn't new. It didn't start in 2000. It started in the 60s. And again, it's because the work he did was very valuable and effective, and his ability to galvanize and organize people was something that they feared. And so, you know, Cointelpro isn't an old thing. It's a thing that has evolved over time and gotten better. And so it's still alive and well today. And the release of this movie has made me or reawoken a feeling that irritates me a bit, but it's also a good thing. It's great that this is a part of, you know, public interest again, but it's terrible that we continue to wait until movies come out about past deeds to wake up a little bit. It's like we still have heroes that are victims of this today, and Imam Jamil is one of them.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, maybe somebody can post the link. The name of the documentary is? Can you tell us the name of the documentary again?
Oh, the name of it's not a documentary. It's a movie. It's called Judas and the Black Messiah. It's huge. It's like it's the number one. I think it's the number one movie in America right now.
Okay, excellent. So we're gonna certainly try to see it. Okay, so
Inshallah.
Now I would like to enjoy the privilege, and while you guys are getting your questions ready, to ask Dr. Hadid a question because it touches upon what Kyrie said. Dr. Hadid, can you tell us, like, you were the founder of that Africana Studies program at Tennessee University, and so how important it is in all this struggle that we are talking about now with Kyrie, with the thing that Imam Ahmed was talking about, how important is that struggle for education? How important it is to essentially, you know, provide this information to public so the public can form up their own mind, right? You know, getting information directly from the people who actually know the story. If Dr. Hadid is with us still.
Yeah, I'm still with you.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillah. Education is the key. But as we get the education, we have to understand that education is for critical thinking. It is for problem solving. And we just can't get any kind of education. We have to get an education that was, first of all, is going to make us independent in our thinking, make us committed to self-determination, self-reliance, and moving in a direction where we can be economically relatively self-sufficient. Because I think, you know, when at the beginning, when we were getting education, we started out because we're illiterate, so we had to learn how to read and write, and then we got education, whether it was, you know, grade school or college. But the bottom line is most of our people that get education end up working for somebody else. And most of the time they're working for the same people that are oppressing us. So we need to figure out a way to get an education so that we can be free in mind, free in fact, and start thinking about how we can create employment for ourselves and our families, and also for other members of our community. Entrepreneurship, because as you know, people tend to think, well, you know, the best jobs are in corporate America. But most jobs, when you look at where people work, we're talking about small businesses. Employment in America is based on small businesses. So we need to figure out how we can do that. And like Imam Nasser was talking about earlier, we have a concept called New Africa, where we have, you know, 4 institutions. You know, it's the mosque, the school, you know, the business activity, and self-governance. So we need a piece of land, we need a community, and we need to develop that community. A lot of what like Jamil Al-Amin was doing in Atlanta, what the Nation of Islam has always done, what Imam Muhammad's community has always done. So I think we can look at those models and say, well, this needs to become the norm rather than the exception to the rule. So that's where
can you also touch upon the role of H. Rob Brown during those times? I mean, you talk about Southeast dynamic. Can you just, from your perspective, what was his specific contribution to the civil rights movement, and how important figure he is, so that people who are here with us today understand?
Well, alhamdulillah, I had the good fortune. I went, I'm not sure whether it was an ISNA conference or MSA conference, but I got off the plane and I got a taxi. So there was a person sitting next to me, real tall, maybe about 6'6" or something like that, and just laid back. He was sitting next to me. So when he got out of the car, I mean, he was probably as tall as LeBron James. And he told me who it was, and I was just mesmerized. I mean, I was normal when I was sitting next to him in the taxi. But then when he told me who it was, he's Jamil Al-Amin. So during that whole conference, he and I was sitting to have breakfast together. We had dinner together. And, you know, during the whole time he was there, you know, even when we got up for Fajr and he would lead the, you know, the prayers or something like that, have a halakha. I was just around him for like 3 days. And I was just so impressed with him. And because, you know, when John Lewis shifted from being the chair of SNCC, and then he moved over with Martin Luther King and joined the ranks of the SCLC. But at first, Stokely Carmichael became the chair. Then after Stokely, H. Rod Brown became the chair. And then, of course, I remember when they joined the ranks with the Black Panther Party and a part of that Central Committee. But what I was understanding, because I was out in California at the time, my impression was that, no disrespect intended for, you know, Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, but they were taking an approach of seeing the lumpen proletariat as, you know, the main core for organizing the struggle, and then, you know, armed self-defense. But then when James Forman, Jamil Al-Amin, and Kwame Ture joined their ranks, from what I could see on an intellectual point of view, because these brothers had been to college, they had gone to the HBCU. So I think they were heads and shoulders above what the Panthers were talking about at that particular time. Because the Panthers were blowing a strong line of Marxist-Leninism. Now, the person that, if you were going to talk about Marxist-Leninism, naturally you would have to talk about Angela Davis. I mean, she was thorough. And none of them were in the same league with Angela. So I think what was happening with the Central Committee of the Panthers in Oakland, and maybe one in LA as well, you know, they were getting cliches and putting them out there. But Jamil Al-Amin, Kwame Ture went in the direction of Pan-Africanism. He left the country, went over to study in a Muslim country in Guinea, under Sekou Touré and Kwame Sekou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah. And that's how he changed his name. You know, his name went from Stokely Carmichael to Kwame after Kwame Nkrumah, and Touré after Sekou Touré. You know, Muslim, you know, Sekou Touré's bloodline goes all the way back to the jihads fighting against the French, you know. So he was just a thorough revolutionary. We're talking about his grandfather, Sekou Touré's grandfather, right? So he was getting that type of knowledge. Then, of course, Jamil Al-Amin was getting knowledge through the Dar Islam movement, right? So he's getting, you know, clear guidance in that direction. So I think that among the, you know, the Muslim thinkers in this country, he has to be right up there, you know, among the best. I'm talking about theory and practice, not just, you know, getting some cliches or a hadith or some ayats from the Quran and spouting them, just talking. Jamil Al-Amin was, a serious community organizer, and still is a serious community organizer, and an intellectual. I read the first book I read was, Die Nigga Die, and then I read his other books, Revolution by the Book. And when in fact, I have those in my library. When you compare the two, I mean, you just see the growth. Die Nigga Die is when he was Rap Brown, and then Revolution by the Book is when he was Jamil Al-Amin, and he talks about how he evolved, from those levels, and going. He was at Southern, and he left Southern, and he went to Howard, and that's where he met Stokely, and then so the rest is history. So that's what I know about him. Of course.
Can I just interject just a little bit? He did.
Hey man, I'm sure you got the inside track, brother. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to give his brother Ed Brown, the kind of love he deserves. He passed away some years back, but that was the reason why he went to Howard, because my uncle was enrolled in Howard. So when my father decided to drop out of Southern to full-time fight, the first place he said he was going to go was obviously where his brother was, and that was Howard. And so his brother was on the front lines up there when he welcomed my father. And my father just took it to the next level and became the figure that he is. But that was his reasoning actually for going to Howard. So that was accurate. You were right. I wanted to make sure that I showed some love to Uncle Ed.
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely.
Excellent, excellent. So this is exactly what I love for my students to understand, and people in general, the importance of education. This is what you just, Dr. Alhadi, kind of emphasized, even with Imam Jamil being that such a kind of iconic figure in the civil rights movement. Look how important is the proper education. So that's excellent. So now we have a question for Imam Nasir, but before we go there, Kyrie, can you tell us a little bit about the movement that your father started? How is it now? Is it still on, and what's going on?
Which movement are we talking about? The Islamic movement or the,
yes.
the movement in the 60s?
Yes, the Islamic movement.
Okay, I was about to say the Islamic movement is the one that I'm a little bit more familiar with because I've only ever known Imam Jamil. I wasn't around for H.Rap Brown so much. But yeah, no, his goal has always been to unite, the Muslims under the auspices of Quran and Sunnah. All of the different sects and things like that. His thing was, look, Quran and Sunnah, if we're on that path, then we should all be doing the same things, from something as small as starting and ending our fast on the same days to something as large as being the imam over organizations like ISNA, ICNA, MANA, AMC, the American Muslim Council, these kinds of organizations and governing bodies that were designed primarily to give us some kind of unification and organization amongst ourselves. As for, are they still alive? Sure. Yeah, they're still, ISNA, ICNA, they're still things. I don't remember the last time we've all broken and started fast on the same day, but outside of that, yeah, the institutions are definitely still there. But the guidance and the direction and the fervor and the energy that Imam Jamil brings to the table is something that's very difficult to replace. And so when you remove that, the momentum may not be there like it was, but the institutions, they're there. Alhamdulillah, they're still doing the things that they need to be doing to stay alive. So, it's a blessing that we have them.
Okay, Dr. Musa is asking, and I don't know who can answer this question. Do Black Muslims support Black Lives Matter movement? Where do African American Muslims stand with that movement? Anyone of you can shed a light on this, because I do know that some people are very much involved. They actually initiated when the movement started several years ago in Minnesota. But any one of you is familiar with and I can answer the question.
I actually, I've spoken to my father about the Black Lives Matter movement relatively at length, and I don't think it's a matter of we should support it. I think everyone should support it because Black Lives Matter. Whether it's whether you're supporting certain individuals involved or not, I don't know. But Black lives do really matter, and it's the rallying cry for a lot of the injustices we see. And so, yeah, I think it's something we support. Now, one of the requests that he has of them is to support his situation as well. If Black lives really matter, then his should definitely be one of the ones that matters, as somebody who fought for Black lives and all other color lives for so long. So that's the discussion that we've had. Outside of that, like the ideology is great. I don't even know if it really is an organization. At one point, wasn't their ideology that they didn't have leadership? So there's no organization without leadership. So, the ideology is great. The slogan is great. Black lives really do matter. And so if you're trying to find a way to figure out how you fit in there, if Black lives matter to you, figure out a way to express it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Kyrie. Excellent. And that's what I also stand for, that if Black lives matter, then the life of Imam Jamil or H.Rap Brown definitely matters, and people should be more concerned about it. I absolutely agree with you. And now, Dr. Nasir, we have one student asking, DeAndre, do you want to ask your question directly, or you want me to read it for you? He's asking, is there more information about African American Muslims and their involvement in the civil rights and human rights movement? He's asking you.
Yes, you mean, is there literature? I'll have to do a little research, see if I can find it. Yes, there's literature. But names, dates, and times, I'll have to see if I can locate that publication for you.
But perhaps even the book by Dr. Alhadi, this book on Between Cross and Crescent, is one good start. The beginning,
Absolutely.
Those who are interested, they can start from there.
Yeah, that's right. And then there's another one by Michael Sahir we had last year.
Yeah, it's available at our library, in Broward College Library, Men Behind Men.
That's right, the man behind it, right.
Thank you. All right, so anyone else has a question, please feel free to just raise your hand, signal somehow they want to ask the question, because if not, we will conclude soon. Dr. Alhadi, the question is for you. Do you think that Black Muslims face discrimination within the Black community as well? Do you think that there is, how they call it, colorblind racism happening as well? Dr. Alhadi.
There are about 40 million African Americans. Of that 40 million, I would say, if you say that there are 10 million Muslims in this country, I would say half of them would be African American, by 5 million, and then the other half would be, the Muhajireens, and we would be the Ansar, or the indigenous Muslim. But in that regard, I think, we have to qualify that. Now, of course, you have reactionaries in every group. You have people in every group that can be misled, by different groups, In other words, if you have something like a conservative group or a right-wing group, and African Americans happen to be a part of that, whether it's a religious group or a political group, then they're going to espouse the views of that group. Now, on the other hand, if you do the math, you have to realize that most African Americans have Christian relatives, mother, father, sister, brothers, uncles, and aunts. We are literally surrounded by African American Christians who are related to us by blood. So I think those numbers will be larger than the haters out there. So we're going to go with, blood, and just, ignore the haters. That's our position.
Okay, excellent. All right, any other question, people? Or we can have now concluding thoughts of our guests. Any other questions? No questions?
I have a question, Dr. Mirsad.
Please go ahead. This is our Professor Maha. She is a professor at Nova Southeastern University, and she's also a lawyer. So if anybody needs a good lawyer, there you have one here locally. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Mirsad. Brother Kyrie, if you can expand on Imam Jamil's involvement in the fight against the Bosnian genocide and his overall transition from just fighting for the empowerment of Black people to fighting for the empowerment of people all over the world.
No, yeah, absolutely. I touched on that a little bit earlier when I said that, Islam was the reason for that transition, but the Bosnian struggle was, one of the many that he was on the forefront of. I remember growing up and going to see him at his store, and he had a huge banner from one of the rallies he attended that said, stop the genocide in Bosnia, in Kosovo. And same with his written outspokenness for Darfur. He started to understand that, again, it's a human rights struggle. It's a human rights thing. Any wrongs or any injustices being committed against anyone by an oppressor must be fought against. That is his mantle, as he would say. And so, that's a good question following up the racism question. I just wanted to touch it since I'm here. I've never really experienced racism, or even colorism to the extent I have outside of Islam, inside of the African American community. It's usually from without, but it's getting better. It's getting better for sure as we begin to move through the generations and have generations that grew up with each other. It's that gap is bridging. But yeah, no, I don't really think. I don't know. I speak for myself and my own experiences. Colorism hadn't really been a thing in the Islamic community as much as it has in the actual African American community at large.
All right. We have one interesting question by Hanif. Hanif, do you want to ask your question directly, please, or you want me to read it? And I don't know, who are you directing the question to? Meantime, somebody posted a good article in Baltimore Sun, a newspaper regarding the Imam Jamil, so anyone interested can read it there. So the question that Hanif asked, in light of the idea of Black solidarity and independence, Hanif, do you want to ask the question finally? Nope. Okay, I might read it later. All right. So
hello?
Yes, please.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, and just direct it to who you would like it to answer it.
Let's see. I'm bad with names. Give me a minute. To Amiri Al-Hadid, in light of like the idea of like Black solidarity, the idea of like Black businesses, Black-owned businesses and banks, and almost like parallel society. I've read about these like religious hamlets in parts of America. There's two that I mentioned. One is in New York, upstate New York, I think. And the other is in South Carolina. And they're just almost like all Muslim communities. They're very rural. They're just mainly farming and stuff. So I don't know if it's exactly that ideal that they had in the 60s and so on, but something that I find interesting, like, is this potentially a worthwhile endeavor? I mean, as of now, these are like, I think the towns have like triple-digit populations, so they're not very big, and they're mostly African-American Muslims. Is this like potentially a worthwhile like endeavor for like Muslims to make their own communities from the ground up on their own land and things like that, and their own institutions that are, you know, almost like by Muslims for Muslims? Or, you know, does this lead to like too much of like parallel society? Is that negative? Oh, is my video on? No. So I don't know. I guess I don't have a really concrete question, but it's something that I've thought about, and I thought maybe it's somewhat relevant in this context.
Well, we're not talking about like we were in the old days when we were talking about separation. The new paradigm on the planet now is diversity and inclusion. And when you realize that we have a browning of America, and that's what, you know, all this right-wing reaction is all about, all this white supremacy is about, because, you know, Europeans are now becoming a minority demographically. Now, they still retain the power, but in terms of the political process, you know, America is becoming a majority country, and that's real. And I think the people who are pushing back and reacting and know it's real. But the point I'm making too is that when you look at the African-American community, don't hold me on these numbers, but I would say at least half of us have made it into the American middle class, either through college or self-employment or, you know, a variety of approaches in terms of that career and profession. But then you have another group of our members of our community who have not made it there. You know, they're still victims of poverty, still victims of unemployment, victims of the school to prison pipeline, the prison industrial complex. So we have to figure out a way by which we can get those brothers and sisters, those families and those communities into some type of economic situation. Because in other words, if we make it up, then we have to reach back and pull them up. We just can't make it up to having a $500,000 house or making six figures and not look back in terms of where we came from. Because our position, see, those of us that are in the middle class, many of us are only one paycheck out of poverty and skating on plastic. You follow what I'm saying? So if we get a downturn in the economy, we slide right back to the brothers and sisters who are at the bottom of the well. We can never, ever ignore the brothers and sisters at the bottom of the well. And I think that's what was so powerful about Marcus Garvey and the Nation of Islam and Moorish Temple. Their base was the people at the bottom. It wasn't the elites in the middle class. That was their base. Or even if you look at people such as Father Divine and Daddy Grace, or Reverend Ike, you know, who had a social gospel. They were trying to take care of the people at the bottom. And so that's what we need to focus on, because if we don't take care of them, then guess what? Our community, we can continue to be infested with drugs and crime, and it won't be safe communities. They're not safe because of economic reasons, not because people just mean-spirited or something pathological is going on. If you don't have and you envy people that do, I mean, you're going to behave in that type of way, like Jahiliyyah. So we do have a region of Jahiliyyah in our community, and we need to have a formula as to how to address that.
We have here a question for Dr. Al-Hadid. What do you think we should do? We should start doing in order to prevent the discrimination and to improve lives of the people in our country? And maybe that would be a final question or final thought. Yeah.
Well, I can only quote Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. When he made Hajj and he saw the purity of the Ummah, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the purity of Islam, he came back and told the world that America needs to understand Islam because it is one religion that has erased racism and color prejudice from its culture and from its society. And of course, we know as Muslims that what he's speaking about, he's talking about, Islam. He was talking about Muslims. But of course, there is a difference between Islam and Muslim. Muslims are human beings. Islam is perfect. But if you compare, say, for example, in the United States, the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock on Sunday. The most integrated America is Jumu'ah on Friday. You follow what I'm saying? So in other words, if you go to a mosque, you will see cultural diversity. If you go to a church on Sunday, you're going to see, a black church or a white church or a Korean church, a Chinese church. I mean, racism has been embedded, in the Christianity, and what Martin Luther King was trying to do. See, Martin Luther King, I would encourage everybody to go back and revisit his "I Have a Dream" speech, not for the oratory, but for the scholarship that's embedded in that speech. And he was trying to point out that, see, Martin Luther King was like this. He was confronting America with the Holy Bible in his right hand and the United States Constitution in his left hand. And he was saying, be true to what you say on paper. Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, on the other hand, he had the Quran in his right hand and the Declaration of Independence in his left hand. The Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all human beings are created equally, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now, I want to quote some from the Quran that he said in relationship to human rights. Hajj Malik said, the Quran compels the Muslim world to take a stand on the side of those whose human rights are being violated, no matter what the religious persuasion of the victim is. Islam is a religion which concerns itself with the human rights of all mankind, despite race, color, or creed. It recognizes everyone as part of one human family. And I think that should be our manifesto and our credo. I mean, he's clear on that question. So I think the move forward is to stand on those principles and bring Islam to the people in this society in the best way. We can't bring it to them in some dogmatic way or, in other words, America has its own culture. So we can't bring a foreign culture or foreign interpretation of Islam. We have to develop Islam from the inside out, the same way the Rasul did in Medina. I mean, he wasn't trying to give people a Chinese version of Islam. He's trying to give them an Arab version of Islam, and then he diversified. But everybody got to be on board. We can't have this duality between the indigenous Muslims and the immigrant Muslims. Immigrant Muslims are trying to assimilate. African-American Muslims are dealing with self-determination and self-reliance. We know assimilation is not an option as long as you don't look like white people. That's delusional. We've been through that. We've been here for 430 years. It hasn't worked, and it's not going to work. So we have to have economic power. We have to have political power. We have to have social power. In other words, if you don't want to be accepted, you can't be rejected. We can't use white values to determine our destiny. We have to use our own values as Muslims and as African Americans. That's the way I see it.
So, okay, so for every one of you, thank you for joining us. This is the point of the community education, as I said in the beginning. So not only a public education, but the community education. I am very happy to be part of Broward College, which used to be a community college, but now it's just a college. And I like that part of it, that it is a community college. So we are supposed to provide community education. And I hope that all of you have gotten today part of that community education. We were able to listen to these awesome and amazing people and understand some elements of that struggle for civil rights, which is still ongoing, and how these elements for civil rights also involved, particularly involves this focus on human rights, and focus from that focus on human rights, that kind of Islamic focus on justice. You guys sometimes maybe wonder, where is the tension? There is one worldview that emphasizes peace, and then there is another worldview coming from Muslims that emphasizes justice. And sometimes that worldview looks strange, but you have to understand this insistence on justice is, very core, very essence of this is Muslim perspective on the world. And so you see it over and over and over again. With that said, thank you, people. Thank you again, all of you. Thank you from all over the world, the people who join us. And of course, I have awesome students, and they were with us too.